When I lived in New York, I took up a habit of saying, living in the city has ruined me. And it was partly true. It was true that I loved my home. When I moved there, I never meant to stay. I was going to come back to the Pacific Northwest and go back to Bellingham and resume my life after 2 years in New York. But I loved the city. I loved the crowds and getting on that subway and being all smushed in there and hearing Italian and French and Hebrew spoken all around me. And I loved the food. I loved the fast pace of the city where it just made your heart go faster. You feel like I am really in the middle of something here. It's so energizing. So when I would go shopping with my husband, I would think, oh, I'll never find shoes like this in Bellingham. I'm ruined. This was partly untrue because I had been ruined before I moved to New York. You see, even back in Bellingham was my first real home. After a rootless childhood, moving around and going from relative to relative, from town to town, changing schools several times every year, I came to Bellingham when I was 18 and I stayed for 14 years. And I picked up hobbies that were inherent to the Bellingham culture, like cycling and running and swimming. And I had a border collie. We ran together and we cycled together and we swam together. And this had become part of my identity. But even then, when I lived in Bellingham, when I had formed this outdoorsy identity for myself, I still felt this feeling. I felt this knocking like a bolt that was loose somewhere in my stomach that said, you are missing it. You are not living the life you should be living. You missed the boat. If I saw a magazine picture with David Duchovny and Téa Leoni frolicking in Bora Bora, I would be like, why am I not on the beach somewhere? Probably this is one of the reasons I decided to go to New York when the job offer came. So I went to New York and I had a great time. But the whole time, it raised the level of my dissatisfaction in proportion to how exciting it was. The more fun I had in New York, the more I longed for home. I became the super queen diva of misery. I had a complaint for every season. Summer. Why don't they have any places here to swim outside? How I miss Lake Padden. Ooh. Winter, with my leggings and my fleece pants and my fleece jacket and my scarf and my hat and my down jacket that reached to my ankles, zipped down like Kenny. I was still so cold, walking the dog. You can't even go outside here in the wintertime, it's so cold! Fall is so beautiful in New York. The leaves they don't have evergreens there like we have here. They just have leaves, just walls of leaves. So beautiful, and I would say, it's so far to get to the nature from here. We can never go hiking. Spring, of course. Why don't we have a yard? I could plant tulips. It was always something I do not know how my husband put up with me. There will be days we're on the subway, riding into Chinatown so we could get a barbecue pork humbao for 50 cents and 5 fried dumplings for $1 at the shop called Fried Dumplings. And I would look up on the ad on the subway car and I would see a Club Med ad with photoshopped water bubbles flying in the air and children laughing at sand, and I would go, why don't we ever go to the beach? I don't know why that man married me. He's a saint. The worst of it happened on 4th of July in 2003. We had moved to Brooklyn. We had an apartment that had bars on the window because it was on the ground floor. And those bars did not have the little cage for the air conditioner. So we hadn't been able to install the air conditioner. And at night, it was so hot that if you touch the sheet, it just makes you sweaty and gross. And so I would go in the bathroom and get a whole bunch of towels really wet, and I would go and lay them on my body and lay in bed and fall sleep and wake up a couple hours later covered in dry towels. They were all hot and gross, and go and do it again. And 4th of July came, and everybody leaves New York on a long weekend. Everybody who's organized and everybody who has thought ahead. For those of us who didn't think ahead, there are no hotels available for 150 miles. I came home from walking the dog, thinking about how I wish I could exercise my dog without giving her heat stroke, and before I know it, I was crying. And I'm not talking about crying, I'm talking about blubbering, snot running down my face, tears dripping off my chin, that kind of abandon that only 5-year-olds can normally do. The next 4th of July, we went to Puerto Rico. 7 years later, when my daughter was 18 months old and my son was in my tummy, we decided to move home and be closer to our families. Predictably, I was miserable. We lived in Shoreline, where there are no sidewalks, and the only way you can even get to a coffee shop is by driving a car. There was a lovely park near my house. I would take my daughter to swing. We were the only people there, day after day after day. My husband and I started watching the Food Network a lot. We like food, but the Food Network is filmed in the Chelsea Marketplace. The Chelsea Marketplace also houses the offices of Oxygen Media, where Chris and I worked when we first arrived in New York, where we met. You can see in the Chelsea Marketplace, occasionally on Food Network, look, Fat Brownie, remember, look, they're in the bagel shop, our old haunts on TV. But watching New York on the Food Network from Seattle is a little bit like watching Earth from the moon. I feel like I've been expelled from civilization. Like, I didn't even realize all of the things we had become accustomed to in New York that we weren't getting here, like movies. The first opening of every movie is always in New York. You never have to wait. I saw the producers with the original cast. Most importantly, when Google Maps launched their Street View, every house on my block was there. Every house. There were no dark spots. So here I was on the edge of the universe. I stayed home with my son for the first year, and I fell into the habit of watching Sex in the City every day during my nap. If you haven't seen this show, it's about 4 single women living in Manhattan. But it's not really about those 4 women. It's really one long love letter written by Carrie to Manhattan. It is about living in the city. And I watched that show with the ferocity and malcontent of a dumped girlfriend. You know, that one that calls in the middle of the night? I even wrote love letters of my own. Manhattan, she'll never know you the way I do. Eventually, I did go back to work, and we bought a house in Green Lake, which is as close to Brooklyn as we could find in Seattle, which is to say it's not like Brooklyn at all. But we are in the city. We are steps from a park with a lake, and I can walk to a coffee shop. Eventually, I joined Toastmasters and started pursuing a lifelong dream of becoming a public speaker. And then the Moth came to Seattle, and I started going to the Moth, and I spoke at the Moth. One night a few weeks ago, I was walking my dog in the evening, and I came to a certain corner of my neighborhood. This corner, you can see the lights of downtown and the Space Needle at night. And I stopped. And I noticed something strange. That feeling, that melancholy feeling of despair, that sense that I'm missing it, wasn't there. Now, dog walking time is prime time for me to sit and stew. So I thought, how could this be? And I've been paying attention since that day. It hasn't come back. And I think that I have finally figured out what the secret is. I think that, like Dorothy, I have ruby slippers. There's no place like home if you make your home there. My sister-in-law once told me, I like to bloom where I'm planted. And I said, what does that mean? How can you do that? I don't even know. I'm not at my house. What am I supposed to do? I went out into the world. I pursued the things that I love that are available to me here. No, I don't go mountain biking anymore because I'm not near any trails and my children are small, but I do Toastmasters. I'm living the life that is available to me to the fullest extent possible, and I'm blooming. Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, thank you very much.